At 79 years old, Joyce DeWitt has finally broken her silence about one of television's most famous riffs. For decades, fans of Three's Company could only guess at what really happened between her and co-star Suzanne Somers. On screen, they were inseparable as Janet and Chrissy. Off-screen whispers of contract battles, tense sets, and shattered friendships swirled. Joyce avoided the subject entirely for years, never confirming, never denying, and never letting her side be told. Now she has decided to reveal the truth about what drove them apart, what it cost her personally, and how it changed the course of one of the most beloved sitcoms in history, though. What she says might not be the story you expected. When Three's Company premiered in 1977, it was unlike anything else on television. The premise was simple but daring. Two women and a man sharing an apartment. With misunderstandings and comedic tension driving each episode, Joyce DeWitt played Janet Wood, the practical, level-headed brunette who often acted as the voice of reason. Suzanne Somers was Chrissy Snow, the bubbly blonde known for her perfectly timed, hilariously naive one-liners. Together with John Ritter's physical comedy as Jack Tripper, the chemistry was electric. Behind the scenes, the three leads were more than just co-workers. They rehearsed together, spent downtime chatting on set, and shared in the thrill of seeing the show's ratings climb. By the end of the first season, Three's Company was a cultural phenomenon, drawing millions of viewers each week. Magazine covers, late-night appearances, and fan letters poured in, cementing the trio as one of television's most beloved casts. That early camaraderie was genuine. Joyce often spoke of respecting Suzanne's comedic instincts, while Suzanne publicly praised Joyce's sharp timing and grounded presence. John Ritter, ever the peacemaker, seemed to bring out the best in both. The set had a rhythm, with playful banter between takes, collaborative brainstorming during rehearsals, and mutual encouragement as they navigated sudden fame. It was a golden period where success seemed to bind them together. But television history has shown that rapid fame can be as volatile as it is exhilarating. Every boost in ratings brought more media attention, public appearances, and conversations about what each star was worth, not just to the audience, but to the network. In those early years, there was no sign that the trio's bond would fracture. To outsiders, they seemed perfectly matched, destined to ride the wave of success together. Yet behind the smiles and press interviews, seeds of future conflict were quietly being planted. They would not sprout until money entered the conversation, in a way that tested friendships, loyalty, and the show's future. When it did, the fallout was unlike anything fans had imagined. By the dawn of the fifth season, Three's Company was no longer just a hit. Sitcom It was a ratings powerhouse. Millions tuned in every week, advertisers paid top dollar, and the network raked in profits. While audiences saw nothing but laughs, a different drama was unfolding. Suzanne Somers, who had become the breakout star thanks to her portrayal of Chrissy Snow, decided it was time to renegotiate her contract. At the time, she earned $30,000 per episode, respectable for the late 1970s, but far less than male leads of similar hit shows. She and her husband, Alan Hamill, acting as her manager, believed her contribution warranted a dramatic pay increase to $150,000 per episode, plus 10% of the show's profits. This was a bold move, especially considering the era and the network's history with contract disputes. For Joyce DeWitt, the request was shocking. Her philosophy toward acting had always been rooted in the craft, not the business. She had a favored nations clause in her contract, meaning that if one cast member's pay increased, the others would match. While this clause protected her financially, Joyce saw Suzanne's demand as a dangerous gamble that could jeopardize the show's future. ABC responded with swift resistance. Rather than renegotiate under pressure, executives decided to make an example out of Suzanne. What followed was a high-stakes standoff. Tension spilled onto the set not through shouting matches or public confrontations, but in a noticeable change in the atmosphere. Where laughter had once been easy, there was now a cautious distance. For John Ritter, close to both women, the conflict placed him in an impossible position, if you want. I can continue rewriting the rest of the article in the same flowing narrative style. Do you want me to do that? He tried to remain neutral, avoiding public statements and doing his best to keep the work moving forward. Joyce, however, felt that Suzanne's approach was transforming their once tight-knit cast into a fractured group where business and personal relationships no longer aligned. What had begun as a conversation about fair pay and recognition evolved into a philosophical divide. Was acting a craft to be nurtured for its own sake, or was it a business where leverage should be used to secure the best possible deal? For Suzanne, it was the latter. For Joyce, it was not so clear-cut, and soon the conflict escalated beyond negotiations affecting the structure of the show and the way the cast interacted. When Suzanne Somers' contract dispute with ABC reached its peak, the network acted decisively, not by meeting her demands but by pushing her to the fringes of the show. She was not officially fired at first, but she was removed from the main dynamic that had made Three's company successful. During her final season, her screen time was slashed to just a few minutes per episode. Chrissy Snow was often shown on the phone in a separate location, speaking with Janet or Jack. These scenes were filmed entirely apart from the rest of the cast. Suzanne would arrive on set escorted by a security guard, quickly film her lines with only a crew member reading the other side, and leave without seeing Joyce or John Ritter. Fans noticed Chrissy's diminished presence, and tabloids speculated about a feud. Inside the production, the isolation was undeniable. The lively, collaborative set they had once enjoyed now felt fractured. Cast and crew who had spent years building chemistry were forced to work around an invisible wall. For Joyce, this was more than awkward. It was disheartening. She had built her career believing ensemble work thrived on trust and interaction. Watching a co-star removed from that process changed the energy entirely. The easy rhythm of earlier seasons was gone, replaced by unspoken rules about what could be discussed, where people could stand, and when cast members could appear on set. John Ritter tried to maintain professionalism, delivering strong performances despite the awkward logistics. But even he could not fully bridge the gap. The scripts began to change, introducing new characters to fill the comedic void left by Chrissy. The once tight trio that had carried the show from day one was no longer the same. Behind closed doors, Joyce and Suzanne did not speak at all, not a quick hello, not a passing word. While neither publicly attacked the other, the silence was as much a statement as anything they could have said. For viewers, the change in tone was subtle at first, but inside the studio, the separation hung like a shadow over every rehearsal and taping. What had started as a business negotiation became an emotional and physical divide that would not heal for decades. After the final phone scene was filmed, the distance between Joyce and Suzanne only grew, stretching into years without a single word exchanged. When Suzanne Somers' final appearance aired in 1981, the official line was that Chrissy Snow had moved back home to care for her mother. The reality was far less warm. Behind the scenes, the contract dispute had reached a permanent stalemate, and Suzanne's time on the show was over. With her departure came an even deeper silence between her and Joyce, one that lasted for decades. For the next 30 years, they did not speak, not a phone call, letter, or a chance encounter at industry events. Both moved forward, but the shadow of Three's company lingered. Whenever the show was mentioned in interviews, journalists inevitably asked about the feud. Joyce's answers were measured, often deflecting, saying she preferred to keep her private life private. Suzanne was more open about the business disagreement but avoided personal attacks. The press, however, painted their story as a bitter grudge. Tabloids ran headlines about on-set betrayal and lifelong enemies, fueling fan speculation. In reality, both women were busy with new projects, Joyce with theater and occasional TV roles, Suzanne with books, talk shows, and her own line of health and beauty products. Yet the unresolved history lingered like an unfinished chapter neither was willing to write. John Ritter remained a quiet connection between them, maintaining friendships with both separately, but never bringing them together. His sudden passing in 2003 was a devastating blow to both, and though it stirred old emotions, it did not bridge the gap. The years that followed only made the distance feel more permanent. Fans speculated about why Joyce and Suzanne never reconciled sooner. Some blamed pride, others the deep wounds from the business fallout. The truth was more complex. To women, with different philosophies about work and loyalty, shaped by an industry that often pits co-stars against each other. If you want, I can continue and seamlessly combine this with the first section you shared to create one fully flowing narrative. Do you want me to do that? And then in 2012, something happened that no one could have predicted. After 3 decades of silence, a surprising invitation would bring them face to face once again. Live in front of an audience and change the narrative of their relationship forever. In early 2012, Suzanne Somers was hosting her online talk show Breaking Through, a platform where she discussed health, relationships, and lessons from her career. Casual and conversational, it was very different from the sitcom world that had made her famous. One day, she made a decision that surprised even her most devoted fans. She reached out to Joyce DeWitt with an invitation to appear on the show. At first, Joyce hesitated. 3 decades of silence is not something easily undone with a single phone call, and there was no guarantee the meeting would be comfortable or warm. But something in Suzanne's tone suggested sincerity. She explained that she wanted to clear the air and finally address the tension that had defined the way fans remembered their time together. Perhaps it was age, perspective, or the realization that life is too short to let old wounds fester. But Joyce agreed. When the day came, the audience watching online knew they were about to witness something rare. As Joyce walked onto the set, Suzanne stood immediately. There was no scripted awkwardness or manufactured tension. They hugged long and genuine, and for viewers, that simple embrace was more powerful than any explanation. It was the first time they had been in the same room face-to-face since 1981. The conversation that followed was honest but gentle. Suzanne spoke first, acknowledging that the conflict had never been personal in her eyes, but rather a matter of business and self-worth. She admitted her approach had been aggressive and confrontational. She understood how it might have alienated her co-stars. She expressed that she wished she had handled things differently, especially considering how much she valued their early friendship. Joyce shared her own perspective, explaining that the issue had never been about Suzanne asking for more money, but about how the process had unfolded. The set had once been a place of trust and collaboration, and seeing it disrupted so suddenly was painful. She admitted she had not fully understood Suzanne's position at the time, and that communication had broken down almost immediately after the negotiations began. Neither woman denied that the years apart had been a loss. Both expressed regret, not just for the friendship that ended, but for the joy they could have shared in celebrating the show's legacy together. As the interview continued, there were moments of laughter recalling old scenes. John Ritter's legendary pranks and the energy of the early days when everything still felt new. For fans, the exchange was emotional, long-awaited closure that seemed impossible after so many years of silence. The public feud, dissected and exaggerated for decades, suddenly looked very different when filtered through the perspective of 2 women in their 60s, both willing to acknowledge their part in the divide and move forward. By the end of the segment, there was no mistaking the change between them. The wall that had separated Janet Wood and Chrissy Snow's real-life counterparts was gone. They walked off the set together, smiling. The bitterness replaced with quiet understanding that could only come with time. But while that moment closed a painful chapter, Joyce still had one more revelation in the years ahead, an insight into what the feud had truly cost her, and what she had finally come to understand about it as she approached 79. By that age, her perspective on the Three's Company years had shifted dramatically. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. The decades since the feud had been filled with personal growth, theater work, charitable causes, and a deliberate choice to step away from the spotlight. She had lived a quieter life than Suzanne, rarely seeking media attention. But that did not mean the questions ever stopped. Interviews, fan encounters, and public appearances almost always circled back to one topic: the past. The feud and what had really happened behind the scenes. If you want, I can now merge all 4 sections you've shared into one fully polished, flowing narrative without headings, so it reads like a single story. Do you want me to do that? Suzanne Somers' time on Three's Company was marked by both immense success and deep conflict. For years, what began as a conversation about fair pay and recognition evolved into a philosophical divide. Was acting a craft to be nurtured for its own sake, or a business where leverage should be used to secure the best possible deal? For Suzanne, it was the latter. For Joyce DeWitt, it was not so clear. Cut. As Suzanne's contract dispute with ABC reached its peak, the network acted decisively, not by meeting her demands, but by effectively pushing her to the fringes of the show. She was not officially fired immediately, but her role was systematically diminished. During the final season she appeared, her screen time was reduced to a few minutes per episode, often filmed separately from the rest of the cast. Suzanne would arrive on set, escorted by a security guard, shoot her lines with only a crew member reading the other side, and leave without interacting with Joyce or John Ritter. The impact on the cast was unmistakable. The once lively, collaborative set felt fractured. Joyce, who had built her career believing that ensemble work thrived on trust and constant interaction, found the changes disheartening. Scripts were altered, new characters introduced to fill the void left by Suzanne's absence, and the tight trio that had carried the show from day one was no longer intact. Behind the scenes, Joyce and Suzanne did not speak not a word, not a greeting, nothing, for over 3 decades. The silence between them became as much a statement as any argument could have been. When Suzanne's final appearance aired in 1981, the official explanation was that Chrissy Snow had moved home to care for her mother. The reality was far more complicated: a contract dispute, stalemate, and a professional and emotional rift that neither woman could bridge. Over the years, both moved forward with their lives, Joyce with theater and occasional television roles, Suzanne with books, talk shows, and her own line of health and beauty products, but the unresolved history lingered. John Ritter remained a bridge between them in a quiet, unspoken way. But even his sudden passing in 2003 could not reconcile the two women. And then, in 2012, after 30 years of silence, Suzanne made a surprising decision. Hosting her online talk show Breaking Through, she reached out to Joyce with an invitation to appear on the show. At first, Joyce hesitated. 30 years of silence is not undone with a single call. Yet something in Suzanne's tone suggested sincerity. She wanted to clear the air and address the tension that had long defined their public image. Joyce agreed. When the two women finally met on set, the embrace they shared was long, genuine, and unscripted. For the audience, it was more powerful than any explanation. In conversation, they spoke honestly but gently. Suzanne acknowledged that her approach had been aggressive and confrontational, and she understood how it might have alienated her co-stars. Joyce explained that the issue had never been about money, but about how the disruption had shattered the sense of trust and collaboration on set. They shared laughter, remembered John Ritter's legendary pranks, and reflected on the joy of their early days together. By the end of the segment, the wall that had separated them was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding that only time could have nurtured. In her later years, Joyce reflected openly on what the feud had truly cost her. She admitted that losing Suzanne had been about more than a co-star. It was losing the sense of family that had made those early years special. She had gone into the show believing that hard work and mutual respect could shield relationships from Hollywood's cutthroat nature, but the contract dispute shattered that illusion. Joyce also acknowledged the personal impact, missing not just Chrissy Snow, but the real woman she had shared laughs and camaraderie with. Both had been navigating pressures unseen by outsiders. Suzanne fighting for recognition in a male-dominated industry, Joyce striving to preserve the creative harmony of the set. Neither was entirely wrong, yet their inability to communicate allowed silence to grow into a chasm. The 2012 reconciliation lifted a burden Joyce had carried for over 30 years. When Suzanne passed away in 2023, Joyce called her a true and beautiful friend, grateful for the time they had shared on and off the set. Her reflections at 79 reminded fans that feuds are rarely one-sided. They are woven from ambition, misunderstandings, industry politics, and human complexity. Fame fades, shows end, but the way you treat people, both in the moment and decades later, remains. Joyce and Suzanne's story is not just about a contract dispute. It is about how success can unite and divide, and how the choices made in pressure-filled moments echo across a lifetime in the end. Three's Company will be remembered for its humor, the genius of John Ritter, and the chemistry between Janet, Chrissy, and Jack, but the off-screen story Joyce and Suzanne's journey from estrangement to reconciliation offers a lesson far beyond television, that even long-standing rifts can be healed. And it is never too late to mend the relationships that matter most.